William Shakespeare wrote Macbeth for King James I. James was Scottish like Macbeth. Shakespeare intertwined the history of Macbeth with events of King James's life to create his masterpiece. Shakespeare and his actors were known as the King's Men and Grooms of the Chamber. They received increased pay and production time for this play. The play was written to be performed for the first time for King James and the King of Denmark. King James found an ancestor in Banquo. Shakespeare's Macbeth demonstrated how dangerous being the King of Scotland could be. This was also real for James, who felt the throne of Scotland was worth struggling for. It was King James who originated the term Great Britain when he united England and Scotland. It seems King James influenced many factors of the play. Some of the information around suggests that the historical King Macbeth reigned in Scotland for 17 years, from 1040 to 1057. He had a wife named Corroch and a stepson named Lulloch. Although in real life it is likely that Macbeth did kill Duncan, Duncan was not as gentle as he was portrayed in the play. Killing a king was a common thing at this time. Several of Macbeth's predecessors were killed as well. In 1050, the real Macbeth went on a religious pilgrimage to Rome to seek absolution for Duncan's death. Unlike the Shakespeare play, Malcolm killed the historical Macbeth. King James wrote an account of his experiences with witchcraft. It is suggested that once a witch tried to melt James's image in wax, and another tried to poison him with toad venom. They say that James was skeptical of witchcraft, but does not dismiss it. At this time, it was common for people to believe in witchcraft and magic. The three witches in the play symbolize darkness and conflict. They have an active role, encouraging something to happen, but are also witnesses, so you don't know whether they are controlling Macbeth's destiny or just predicting it. During Shakespeare's time, the witches were seen as the most notorious traitor and rebel that can be. The witches were not only political traitors, but spiritual traitors as well. The witches' lines in the first act, "Fair is foul and foul is fair, hover through the fog and filthy air," are often said to set the tone for the rest of the play, by setting up a sense of contradiction. The lines seem to be saying that good is bad and bad is good, so it doesn't matter what you do. The lines take away a sense of morality. The line, "double, double, toil and trouble," shows clearly what the witches intend to do. They seek only trouble for the mortals around them. While the witches do not tell Macbeth directly to kill King Duncan, they use a subtle form of temptation when they tell Macbeth that he is destined to be king. By putting this thought in his mind, they guide him on the path to his own destruction. During Shakespeare's time, people believed that the devil worked like this, like the temptation in the Bible. First the thought is put into someone's mind, and then they choose what to do with that thought. Macbeth and Banquo chose to behave differently. According to J. A. Bryant Jr., Macbeth also makes use of biblical stories, notably between King Duncan's murder and the murder of Christ. There have been several major productions of Macbeth. Macbeth was done in 1660 for Charles II. He assigned the play to Davenant and the Duke's Company. Davenant changed much of the play. He introduced dancing, singing, and gibberish into the witches' scenes. He also made Lady Macduff's role bigger. David Garrick did a production of Macbeth in Drury Lane Theatre between 1742 and 1776. There were only 4 seasons in which he didn't play Macbeth. Garrick kept Davenant's operatic witch scenes, but he made Lady Macduff's role smaller. He also changed Macbeth's dying speech, in which he mentions his guilt, delusion, the witches, and horrid visions of hell. John Philip Kemble and his talented sister, Sarah Siddons, did a production of Macbeth, also at Drury Lane, in the season of 1784. Siddons did an extraordinary scene where she, as Lady Macbeth, put the candle down during the sleepwalking scene. This defied the tradition of carrying the candle throughout. Other stage productions of Macbeth were done by Charles Macready, in 1837, Samuel Phelps between 1804 and 1878, Charles Keene and his wife Ella Tree in 1853, and the last great pair from the 19th century were Henry Irving and Ellen Terry in 1874, and later in 1889. There are many examples of modern movie and TV productions of Macbeth. One of the earliest was a silent, black and white 1916 film adaptation directed by John Emerson. Another was Joe Macbeth, a film set in Chicago as a gang war story made in the 1930s. The Throne of Blood, a Japanese story of Macbeth, made in 1957. It was directed by Akira Kurosawa and set in feudal Japan, starring Toshihiro Mifune. A Macbeth movie made in 1997 was called Men of Respect. It was set in New York as a mafia power struggle. It was performed in modern English. A Hindi adaptation of Macbeth was called Macbeth and made in 2003. It was set in the Mumbai underworld. Another Macbeth film was directed by Jeffrey Wright and set in Melbourne, Australia. Again, the theme was gang warfare. A BBC animated version was directed by Nikolai Serebryakov, written by Leon Garfield, and created by Russian animators. In The Throne of Blood, Generals Miki and Moshizu are samurai commanders under a local lord, Lord Suzuki, who reigns in the castle of Spider's Web Forest. After defeating the lord's enemies in battle, they go back to Suzuki's castle. On their way through the forest surrounding the castle, they see a spirit, who tells their future. The spirit tells them that today, Washizu will be named Master of the North Castle and Miki will now command Fort 1. She then tells Washizu that he will eventually become Lord of Forest Castle, and finally she tells Miki that his son will also become Lord of the castle. The Kingdom of Desire was a Taiwanese stage play. During the Eastern Chu dynasty of the Warring State, when feudalism was at its peak, the nation of Qi fell prey to the greed and ambitions of Lord Chancellor Wei Li Bo. East City Defender Oshu and his deputy Meng were asked to settle the disputes. On the way home from their triumphant expedition, the ghost in the mountains foretold the destiny of both men. That Oshu would be awarded chancellorship and he would later succeed the throne, and that Mang wouldn't get anything, but his son was to take the throne after all. Shakespeare Retold Macbeth is a modern take on the Shakespeare play. It is about a chef named Joe Macbeth who works in a fancy restaurant, owned by a man named Duncan Doherty. One night, 3 bin men predict that one day the restaurant will receive 3 Michelin stars, and that one day Joe will be the owner of the restaurant, but the restaurant will go to Fred Billy Banquo's son. Macbeth is one of Shakespeare's greatest tragedies. There are many different versions of Macbeth, and these are just a few. I think the fact that there are so many adaptations, Hindi, Ugandan, Taiwanese, Australian, Japanese, shows that Macbeth appeals to something in everybody.